There you are. There's nothing I love more than to sit in my kitchen and talk to a few thousand of my best friends over coffee. So I'm super excited today to introduce you to one of my friends. I'd argue one of the greatest happiness experts in working today in America. As many of you know, I've written about happiness for National Geographic. I wrote a cover story on happiness. I wrote a book, The Blue Zones of Happiness, and I spent a lot of time getting to know the top experts when it comes to happiness. And by the way, just to sort of level set, happiness is kind of a meaningless term because you can't really measure happiness. You can measure life satisfaction, how satisfied you are with your life on a scale of 1 to 10. You can measure how often you feel worry and stress and how often you laugh. You can measure purpose by how often you get to do the things that you do best using your strengths. But our guest today, Samantha Boardman, Dr. Samantha Boardman, is an expert on vitality specifically. She's just written this fabulous book. I'm going to show you now. It's backwards. Sorry. It's called Everyday Vitality. I review it a little bit on my main page, but it is probably the best compendium of current state of research, and Samantha's clinical experience from having spent more than 10 years as a psychiatrist. She was in New York City, where there's more than a few people suffering from mental difficulties, especially given COVID, and she finds time with compassion, with the best research, and with her Harvard education to treat them. I actually met Dr. Boardman about 7 years ago. I was lecturing at University of Pennsylvania. There's a master's degree in applied positive psychology, and most of them are sort of 20-year-old graduate students or 28-year-old graduate students, and all of a sudden there's this one sort of glamorous woman in the middle of her career, or maybe at the front end a little bit, but somewhere in the middle, taking this course. And I got to know her a little bit and found out she's a practicing psychiatrist, but also taking these courses or getting a master's in positive psychology. And the reason that's important is because the psychiatry industry from the very beginning has mostly focused on trying to get sick people less sick, people with anxiety or depression or schizophrenia better. This whole movement, which started about 20 years ago by a guy named Martin Seligman, the positive psychology movement, tried to come up or foster the science that would help make normal people happier. And it's a completely different science. It's a completely different approach. And the reason I'm so excited about talking to Dr. Boardman today is because she's not only been deeply trained in psychiatry and making sick people less sick, but also in positive psychology. And her book, Everyday Vitality, really goes, it's a hands-on, it's easy to use. This research is always changing when it comes to what works in happiness. And she really marshals in the best research. And she'll be along in a minute. But let me tell you for just a moment here the research I've done on happiness. So as you guys know from following Blue Zones, I'm not a big believer in trying to change your mind or trying to change your behavior, because most of the time it's a short-term intervention. What I believe really works is shaping your environment so you're more likely to do the things that research tells us yields longevity in the case of Blue Zones, or yields happiness in the case of Blue Zones of Happiness. So I see Samantha there. Maybe you could ask to join Samantha. And by the way, her handle is Positive Prescription, and I can let you in here. But so my approach, which is different than Samantha's, I think we have complementary approaches to happiness. Hers is rooted in her clinical experience and in the current research. I tried to find the statistically happiest places around the world, and then reverse engineer what they do. And along with that process is getting a hold of data that represents about, there we go. Nope, that's not her. Oh, yep. Sent to request. There she is, I think.
Somebody said the key to happiness, my buddy at Plant-Based Addict, the key to happiness is wine and pickleball. I happen to agree with you on that. That's what brings me happy. But if you look at worldwide data that represents about 95% of the humans on Earth, you see that if happiness were a cake recipe, right? You need food, you need shelter, you need health care, you need some education, you need some mobility. We all like to have meaningful work. Being with the right partner can drive 90% of our happiness or lack thereof. But the ingredient that has the most variability when it comes to happiness, the most important ingredient, so to speak, get this, is where you live. So then the reason we know this, positive security, unable to join. For some reason, Samantha is unable to join, but I'll just keep going with this point. If you follow immigrants from unhappy places like Moldavia, a Soviet bloc country, or parts of Africa and Asia, and you follow them when they go to happy places like Denmark or Canada, and then check in with them a year later, you find that nothing else would necessarily change about their life. Their sex doesn't change. Their religion usually doesn't change. Their marital status doesn't change. Their psychological makeup doesn't change. Their sexual orientation doesn't necessarily change. The only thing that changes is they moved. And that can occasion about a doubling of their happiness. So in other words, they start reporting the level of happiness of their adoptive home. So you look at a place like Moldavia where people report about a 4 or a 5 on a scale of 1 to 10. And I'm talking about a population here, not just individuals. But if it's Denmark or Canada, they report about an 8. So all that happens is people move to these happier places and they report a doubling of their happiness. Now, I challenge anybody right now listening, tell me one thing you can do that will double your happiness. And not just for a few moments. You know, I can think a few glasses of wine, I'll feel twice as happy. But something that actually sustainably makes you happier. Here we go. We'll try one more time. View request. So I'm going to try that. No, try that. Okay. See if that worked. There she is.
Hi.
The great. Oh, I'm so thrilled to see you.
I'm so happy to see you.
You guys listening, you are in for a treat. Samantha, Dr. Boardman, I guess we should say. It's one of my favorite people on earth. She's not only possesses, I would argue, more expertise broadly when it comes to happiness, or in the case of today's conversation, vitality, but she also lives it. She's an incredibly generous soul. She lives in New York City, where she has an extraordinary social network, many of whom we share, Wendy Murdoch and Aaron Flanagan. She's a patron of the arts. She has 2 wonderful children, a great husband who always sees the whole moon, as she puts it in the dedication of her book. And she also looks great in an evening gown. I've seen her showing up at the Met Ball, something I think a lot of us would like to do. But she not only occupies this wonderful position in New York and in her position as a psychiatrist at the Cornell School of Medicine in New York City. But she's also incredibly humble and a super hard worker and always learning. She has this great newsletter you should all subscribe to. It's called Positive Prescription, right, Samantha?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then out just last week, Everyday Vitality, which I've read over the last 2 days. And it is, I have consumed thousands of pages of research. There's no better compendium than this right here. There's no more accessible, more hands-on, more friendly way to increase the vitality in your life. And before we launch in, I want to cite, Samantha, a quote in your book. It comes from Anton Chekhov. And he said, any idiot can handle a crisis. It's the day-to-day living that wears you out. So I sense that Everyday Vitality is really about not letting that day-to-day living wear you out. Am I right on that?
Exactly. No, and I'm so happy to see you. But it is the day-to-day living. A milder version of that was Muhammad Ali, who said, it's not the mountains ahead that wear you out. It's the pebbles in your shoe.
Very good. So tell us a little bit about what you set out to do with Everyday Vitality, and how does it blend your psychiatric experience and your world of research and positive psychology?
Sure. This book really came to be with my question of what is mental health. I realized in medical school and in psychiatry residency, I'd been studying pathogenesis for so long, the diagnosis and treatment of disease. And this was really a shift into salutogenesis, which was the creation of health. And what does that look like? And to me, vitality was sort of this underappreciated secret sauce of mental health. It combines that physical and psychological positive energy and sense of being alive that's really at the core of everyday well-being. Like if you can answer yes to questions, I wake up with energy every morning. I look forward to each day. I feel alive and full of vitality. And so how do we create it? Like, what is it? How do we create it? And sort of how do we also generate it for others is really what the book's about.
So are there evidence-based ways that we can feel more aliveness or increase our aliveness, as you put it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, obviously there are like the lifestyle interventions, and what I never learned about in medical school or in psychiatry residency was the how vital it was to eat well, to move more, to sleep well, all the stuff that you talk about, the blue zones, and it was sort of considered icing on the cake. You only asked somebody about, what their diet was if you were concerned about an eating disorder. We were only asking about sleep if there was really issues around sleep, and just those fundamental sort of lifestyle interventions that are, that affect not just our physical health, but also our mental health. And, we know people who eat a Western diet, just 4 days of eating a Big Mac and like basically a milkshake affects your mood, your ability to concentrate, and so much so that even your partner recognizes that. So it's so powerful. And I remember asking, I was renewing, my psychiatry license, and I was in a course asking one of the top psychiatrists, like, what about some of these lifestyle interventions? And they said, that's not for us to take care of. And you just think, wait a minute, this is so vital and so essential to our mental health. And we know, like, one of the best boosters of our mental health is moving a little bit, and just putting people on a treadmill for 30 minutes a day, 4 days a week, really help them feel less depressed. And just some of those sort of more fundamental, and it also it's sustained over time. They're much less likely to relapse and feel depressed even in 9 months from then. But then in addition, so you've got the sort of the, not just the mind body, but the body mind stuff. But what we're told a lot, we have to sort of go out and buy expensive things to boost our well-being, or we have to eat, pray, love our way to, well-being. And as you talk about, these interventions are so, they're there for the taking, but we have to pay attention to them. And really it sort of boils down to what I think of as the 3 C's. It's how are we connecting with other human beings? How are we contributing to something beyond ourselves? And how are we challenging ourselves in a positive way?
So those are the 3 keys for getting vitality.
Yeah, and like in your everyday life.
Yeah, I mean, to frame this conversation a little bit more, I mean, we all sort of want to live happier lives. And I know vitality is sort of I would say, a core of well-being or facet of happiness. But research also shows, for those of you interested in longevity, that if you can manage your life into the top 20%, 20 percentile, the top quintile of happiest people, it's worth about 8 years of extra life expectancy over being in the bottom quintile. So you don't want to just be happy for happiness sake. It's good for your health. We know you're less likely to catch a disease. You're less likely to be depressed. You're less likely to suffer chronic stress, to have a heart attack, to commit suicide. So really the suggestions in this book aren't just for you to feel better today. It's for you to add some good years to your life over the course of this great journey we're all on.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
So you, one of the things that caught me right away were the most effective evidence-based ways of reducing stress. And I think most people, when they're really suffering from stress, they think about reaching for a pill, a Xanax or some other anti-anxiety. But there's actually other ways, counterintuitive, unbelievably simple, that research shows are better than, or work better for people than popping a pill. Can you tell us what some of those things are, Samantha?
Sure, and some people, when medication is necessary, I agree, it might be indicated, but there are everyday things that we can do. And looking at a study that Harvard did with Hopkins was 94% of people say that being outdoors, spending time outside lifts their mood when they're having like stressful days. And people say that working on a hobby, spending time with other people, being with a pet, these sort of little uplifts that really counter the everyday hassles that we're experiencing. And here's what's super interesting is, in medical school, I never heard the word resilience, or in psychiatry residency. Now it's a word we hear thrown around all the time, almost so much so that it's become, something that has semantic saturation. Like we don't really know what it means anymore. I was told my dog Panda needed to be more resilient. But what resilience is, it is something when we think of big R resilience, our ability to bounce back after some like major life event. And the good news is it turns out that most people are surprisingly resilient. Even after 9/11, the expectation was that people would be very stressed out in New York, that they would require lots of interventions. Turned out that it didn't happen. But so we have a lot of big R resilience. What I think we lack is that everyday resilience, that little R resilience that helps us manage all those hassles. They accumulate over time, and they take a toll on our mental and physical health in the moment, but also then over time. And so what are those sort of interventions? What can we do to help ourselves feel better? And those uplifts are really important to balance the hassles, like that spending time outdoors, working, doing something for somebody else, working, connecting socially with other people. That those simple interventions that aren't expensive, that are there for the taking, but we have to be deliberate about little R resilience, or it's, we might do the opposite of the thing that would make us feel strong.
You talk about the role of micro stressors in our daily life. Is this related to?
Yes, absolutely. So these micro stressors are just those little things that that you have no control of, that are happening every day. And the thing is, look, nobody brings you a casserole because you couldn't find a parking spot. Like you don't have that outpouring of social support, when your flight was delayed, or nobody's been on a plane recently. But so those little things really do take a toll. And I mean, here's what's interesting. People who have a lot of everyday stress, they're much more likely to catch the common cold. They've done a study where they put, basically on a Q-tip, the flu virus. And students who were having a lot of stress, who were in the middle of exams, were much more likely to actually come down with the flu. They were, when they measured, how like symptomatic they were measuring the amount of mucus in Kleenex. I mean, aren't you glad you are not a graduate student having to do this? But
not a job I want.
Everyday stress, it's terrible. But if you have a lot of everyday stress, you're more likely, to get physically sick, but also it's going to affect your mental health. And some people are more Velcro than Teflon, and I think have a harder time, letting that stuff wash over them. And when you're contributing, connecting, and challenging yourself, you're going to be a lot more Teflon.
So for people out there who are maybe more the Velcro type, who get stressed out by a dirty kitchen or a nagging friend or a job they don't like, which, by the way, most Americans, according to Gallup, do not like their jobs. What are some easy things people can do on a day-to-day basis? Or maybe what do you do to mitigate the micro stressors in your life?
I think we have to be deliberate about delight in our everyday lives. Like, how do you find something? You know, we're all really good. Our brains hang on to what's negative. It's why at the end of the day, you can only remember the things you never got to or the things that irritated you. But I think when we're deliberate about delight, you're actually actively searching for something that is going to delight you in some way and that you're even sharing it with somebody else. And here's something that's also research shows that helps people when they are stressed out. You know, it sort of can feel like this dark cloud that just hovers over you. And that's when you sort of feel Velcro-y. And sometimes you can't even remember why you're in a bad mood, but you know you are. And you're like, wait, was that email or what was it? Be really specific. You know, try to focus in on what exactly are you feeling? Are you just feeling bad is too general? If you can pinpoint exactly how you're feeling and sort of find the word to describe it, it's going to feel a lot less personal. It's going to feel less permanent and less pervasive. And you're also you're less likely to be paralyzed by it and more likely to take action around it.
This is a good point. Can you give us a concrete example?
Sure. I mean, you know, of that, yeah. Like instead of just like, oh, in general, I'm just in a bad mood, you know, and I think we tend to have this binary bias, like things, I'm good or I'm bad. And even looking at this range of emo diversity that we have in our lives, like the people who were even able to find joy within a tough day, you know, laughter within tears. And, you know, that sometimes I think we even feel guilty about that and feel guilty about actually feeling okay or having a laugh even in a dark moment, but how actually important it is and to find that. So here's an example. You know, I feel blah. No, I'm really irritated with this specific thing, with that, you know, find the word, almost like, you know, break out the thesaurus. What's the word you're actually feeling?
I love this.
And get really narrow there, because it feels less debilitating and overwhelming.
Yes, I get it. So if you're angry, you want to know if it is justified anger or is I'm mad because somebody did something to me. I'm guessing the more precise you can be with that emotion, the better you are able to address it and to see the source of it and perhaps see the solution.
Yes, absolutely. And also, I think then you also can use it then as data. You know, then you're using it as information. I think there's a lot of pressure on people sometimes to be happy all the time, smile. But, you know, I'm a big fan. I've studied positive psychology, but I am a fan of negative emotion when it's giving you information. So I think when we try to suppress it, you know, or we sort of grit our teeth or try to sort of, you know, dig our nails into our palms, that's not helping. You can dig into it and learn from it, but use it as data. And then therefore you're much more likely to act on it. And I think we've given negative emotions a bad name sometimes, but it's just, you know, we just don't want to like wallow in them.
Oh, I run away from negative emotions. I feel, if I feel envy or I feel sad or I feel angry, I run away from it. And you're kind of saying, wait, pay attention to it and learn from it.
Pay attention to it and learn from it. So even like, is there any action you can take not to put yourself in that situation again? Because sometimes we can just repeat you know, things, and we're much more likely to learn from it. But there's a line though between that and rumination. When you're ruminating about something, like when you're just wallowing in it and going over and over and over again, it's like the crawl, you know, under the news. That is problematic and is an on-ramp to, you know, to anxiety and depression. And rumination, sometimes we co-ruminate with people, not a good idea either. And you know you're ruminating when
otherwise known as bitching.
Yes. And you're like, wait, didn't I have this conversation before? And it feels like Groundhog Day. That's ruminating or co-ruminating. That's really not helpful either. It's like when you never come to a solution, you're just in it.
It reminds me of this great line by Isabel Allende. She said, you Americans think you have the right to pursue happiness, but actually you have the right to suffer and learn from it. And I think this is a little bit about what you're saying about negative emotion. And That's something we should. By the way, those of you who are listening, if you have questions, go ahead and put them up. I'll pay attention and I'll pose questions to Dr. Boardman if you have any. You probably have one of the best experts in America on right now. We're very lucky to get her. I think we've taken her lunch hour here to talk to us today. And thank you again for taking this time. And by the way, the book, Everyday Vitality, just out. It hit Amazon. I saw it yesterday. It was like #1 in psychology, I think it was. So it's really a beautifully written book. I see Adam Grant blurb you, Ariana Huffington, our great friend Andrew Solomon is one of the best writers, I think, in America. Angela Duckworth, who wrote Grit, I know is another friend of yours, but they just gush about this book. And as do I. I think it's one of the best books of the year if you're really interested in increasing your happiness, increasing your vitality, the aliveness, the core of well-being. And here's the expert to illuminate. So here's a question. Most helpful book. Yeah, somebody else is agreeing with me. Jessica says most helpful book for 2021 and beyond. So I guess you're even a little bit ahead of your time. So I want to talk a minute about social media. You cite this Leon Festinger, maybe you'll correct his name for me, came up with the social comparison theory. Could you talk a little bit about this social comparison theory and how it informs how we might feel using social media and maybe using it too much?
Absolutely. I mean, social comparison really is the thief of joy. And there are times it can be helpful, if you're training to run a race and somebody runs a little faster than you, maybe it can motivate you and fuel, your how much you'll practice or how much, you're going to sort of show up for that race. But it also can really affect us deeply. And I think social media really invites social comparison of the negative type. And it really takes about 17 seconds for somebody to feel badly after looking at Instagram.
That's it, 17 seconds. I just want to underscore that. So is that the shortest amount of time, or do people pretty much start feeling bad every time they look at social media because people tend to post their best lives?
Yes. And if you're not realizing that, especially as like a young person, as a young woman, that you're not realizing, wait, that's not real. And I think if you sort of go in knowing that it's this manufactured, choreographed version of somebody's best life, it's the highlight reel, you'll feel better about it. But otherwise, this perfectionism is on the rise, especially among young people. Perfection being sort of perfectionists in their achievements, but also in their social lives. And we're so sensitive to exclusion as human beings and feeling that we don't belong. And that's really, I think, what happens sometimes on social media is just feeling left out.
I see Agape, Ariana Huffington's great sister. If you don't follow Agape, please follow her. She's on Love You, love your book, Samantha. So that's another great endorsement. But can you give us some, and these just might be your own, but some general guidelines on how to use social media so it isn't repressing our vitality or some sort of optimal amount of time? Any guidelines there, Samantha?
Well, I mean, first of all, don't let it be the first thing you look at in the morning, or the last thing you look at, I think, before you go to bed, and really setting your alarm even to go to bed, which is about an hour before you go to bed, where you put your phone away and in another room. And people will often say, but that's my alarm clock in the morning, and that's like, buy one of those old fashioned clocks and that to wake you up in the morning. But I think if you can use it in a way to be more positive and be generous, not forwarding negative articles. I think especially in the beginning of COVID and the pandemic and the lockdown, saying to friends or family, don't forward me this alarmist information. Moral outrage is something that grabs our attention. Our brains immediately sort of gravitate to moral outrage. And I think when you're spreading moral outrage too, just resisting it. Spread something that's good, share something that delights you, rather than sort of sharing the moral outrage that is, just fueling, I think, more negativity, and it is contagious. And then you're sort of, this is this contagion that you're creating. So I think we can be a little bit more responsible about how we all behave.
I'll offer a data point. We have we created a true vitality test, we called it, which measured different facets of happiness. And we asked people how much time they spent on social media and then correlated it with their happiness. And it turns out the optimally happy people were on social media about 45 minutes a day. They weren't optimally happy at 0. So happiness rose up to 45 minutes a day, and then it dropped. And the least happy people were on social media 6 hours a day. And what that suggested to me that people are using social media as a little bit of a intellectual repose, or they're using it to connect with friends who later they'll connect in real life. Probably a good thing, but I think to your point, this whole kind of comparison theory, and you spend too much time looking at all the gorgeous people and all their fantastic accomplishments on social media, we start looking at ourselves as, I guess I wasn't so great after all.
And also, I think what your point is, when you're actively on social media rather than passively on it, and people who are passively, who are just scrolling, just looking, and actually not participating and sharing, they feel worse as well. I mean, so I think that if you're going to be on it, be active in a positive way for under an hour.
Like we're doing right now. So
yes.
Somebody points out the irony of we're bad-mouthing social media on social media.
Very good point. But there are positive ways. I mean, I think positive ways to use it. Hopefully we're that.
So somebody else chimed in asking about meditation. And I know you cite that a little bit here, but where does meditation figure into vitality?
Oh, I mean, I think for some people, meditation is wonderful, but there was a point, a couple of years ago, I think, when people were feeling really guilty that they weren't meditating too, and that people thinking, well, what do I do if I can't meditate? And I have found some patients who just tell me, it makes me more anxious. I don't do that. And there are other ways to sort of find that. Sometimes it's in a walking meditation, or it's like, being in nature that they can. But I think finding anything that can lift you out of yourself. And if meditation's doing that for you, then that is a vitality booster. And I think when we are sort of in that self-transcendent space, meditation can be a wonderful vessel for that.
Somebody here is pointing out the importance of social media during COVID, and that for her it was an important, critical tool for connecting. So I can imagine if you're all by yourself, locked in your apartment, that maybe social media has a bigger role than it does. If you're in a coffee shop and you should be interacting with people in the real world, instead you're checking your Facebook.
Absolutely. I had my son was on video games a lot with his friends, and that was a source of connection during lockdown, and it was very helpful.
It's probably a source of sanity for you. Although, I've met your children, and they are some of the most well-behaved, well-mannered, smart children I've ever met. So I don't know if adolescence has changed that with any of them, but you've done a wonderful job with those two.
Thank you. They're twerking these days, but thanks.
Well, everybody goes through that stage, I think. Speaking of kids, you have this strategy for kids to do their homework. I know there's lots of mothers out there probably watching right now. And it's not telling kids why and how important it is to study. What is it? What is the trick to get our kids to do homework?
So this was super counterintuitive, and what surprised me, and it's not just for kids doing homework, it's also for people who want to lose weight or save money. And here's what's really interesting. When you asked 8th grade students to give advice to younger students, to 6th graders, about doing homework, the 6th grade students absorbed that information more than they did from a teacher or from a parent. So I just realized as a parent, gosh, when I'm sort of banging on about you should do this or do that, probably your kids aren't absorbing that advice, but they will take it from an older peer. But here's the interesting part, though, is not only did the 6th graders then study more, but the 8th graders who actually gave the advice to the 6th graders also ended up studying more. So when we're in the position of being a giver, and when we think that our advice is meaningful and adds value and matters to somebody else, not only is it beneficial for them, but it helps us tap into our own motivation. And we see ourselves as wearing this other hat as not somebody in need of support, but actually somebody who's able to provide it.
Very good. And so it's more the motivation, and the motivation coming from the right source, as opposed to telling them the how and the why of doing homework, if I'm
Because most
summing it up
people
correctly.
even, I mean, even around, weight loss or exercise, most people actually have the information. We don't really need to provide them with that. It's a question of how do you actually do the behavior that you're sort of reluctant to do? And we all know that if you make the behavior you want to do easier, make the behavior you don't want to do harder, but then also finding that motivation and sustaining it is part of that. And actually putting yourself in the position of being a giver is, I think we sometimes underestimate how good it feels to give. Those studies looking at, if you give somebody $5 or $20 and you say, are you going to be happier if you spend this on yourself or somebody else? People often get that wrong. It's usually when you spend it on someone else and not yourself.
Interesting. So this whole gibberish around retail therapy, it should be philanthropy therapy.
Yeah, or like giving that away and giving some time away. And even, we hear a lot about gratitude and write, your gratitude list, but sometimes I think we've made gratitude too much about ourselves and sort of me, myself, and I. Gratitude, for it to be effective, it needs to be other oriented. It's about expressing appreciation to the other person for who they are and what they've done. And all too often, I think we keep gratitude to ourselves. Studies show that people don't express it because they think they don't have the right words. It's going to sound awkward. The person already knows. And those are missed opportunities, I think, to put something into words. And even the people who are the closest to us, to say it, to express it, even to, put it in writing. And that we can, not only does this give them a lift and we underestimate how much it will help them feel better, but it also is a boost for us.
So we should thank people more than we think we should.
Yes, absolutely. But thank them for who they are and make it other oriented. Don't make it, thank you for making me feel so good, is I think what to be avoided, and make it about them. So thank you for having me on here. I'm loving it.
Yes, and thank all of you for listening right now. I know you could be doing other things. Instead, you're engaging with us, and we both are appreciative of that. You have a 3-point strategy for what you call deliberate vitality. And I love that, because so much of research, sort of tells you what a correlation or it gives you a theory. But you actually have a very nice prescriptive here. And the components are follow through, reimagine resilience, and looking forward. Can you unpack that deliberate vitality for us a little bit in a way that we can put it to work in our lives?
Sure. I mean, it is, when we follow through, we can all have ideas in our head about, what we hope for, or, what our wishes and dreams are, what our goals are. But when we embody them and we hold ourselves accountable in some way, even if we check in with ourselves, did I do those things that I wanted to do today? Am I embodying my values? When I first meet patients, I'll often say, tell me, what do you value most in your life? What are the 3 things that you hold most dear that really matter to you? And then how do you spend your free time? And people are often, struck by the gap, like this gulf sometimes between what they care about and actually what they do and how they embody those values. And when you can create more overlap in the two, you're going to feel more resilient in your everyday life. And so I think that's kind of when if you want to be more outgoing, think of strategies that are going to make you more outgoing and perform them, close that intention action gap and embody those things. Well-being and happiness aren't just in your head. They're in, the actions you take, the connections you make, and how you're participating in some way. And then, I always think moving forward, oftentimes we live too much in the past. And this wonderful old psychiatrist had said to me, what do you think the purpose of therapy is? And I said, oh, isn't it to change your present or your future? And he said, no, it's to change your past. And we get so stuck
Interesting.
to that story that we tell about ourselves. And it can make us sort of, I think it's very limiting, thinking like, oh, I am who I am, and well, probably those are preferences and habits, but that's not what defines you. And, I think people can retreat into that mode. And it's sort of when you're in defense mode, not discovery mode, but not allowing for the change that's happening in you, but just being more deliberate about it, and also allowing for other people to change as well. we judge ourselves by our thoughts, but we judge other people by their actions. If I cut you off in traffic, I was late, but if you cut me up in traffic, oh, maybe that person is a jerk. And I think giving other people the benefit of the doubt, looking at their intentions, and considering what those are, and even us expressing our intentions to other people so they know how we feel. If you look at doctors, if they're giving a shot to somebody, if they say, oh, it's because, this is for your health and your well-being, versus, they don't express it, and then they'll just, it's interpreted.
Jab the needle in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not going to be nearly as good.
That's why I bit my pediatrician as a child. I think if she'd maybe been a little bit more empathetic.
You bit her? You end your book by pointing out that happiness gurus tell us to look into the mirror. To grow and cultivate vitality. But you say you learn through your practice that it's actually best to look out the window. What do you mean by that?
I think that having an outward orientation and an other orientation actually helps us to embody our goals. When we become so self-focused to the extreme, and self-immersion can really sort of bump up against narcissism, and even an excuse for, I had a patient who was so obsessed with her self-care that she really withdrew from her family and friends, and it became quite an isolating experience. So I think when we are looking at our role models, we're intentionally connecting with other people. I think so often we mistake solitude for happiness, when actually we're going to feel much happier when we are doing things in connection with other people. And yes, it might not be in person, it might be online. But I think when we are feeling connected, and that we're adding value, and that we're doing things and learning things that stretch us in some way, that's where vitality and well-being live.
That's I think that's really good. It's really what would you say? I don't have a lot of energy right now. I'm looking for motivation. What would you say is the one most powerful thing that I can do today to turn that around?
I mean, again, it's counterintuitive, and this is where our brains haven't caught up with our lifestyles. You don't realize how doing something energetic will give you energy that requires energy, that you will feel better. We have something called guilty couch potato syndrome. It's like when you spend time, not doing anything, and you actually feel further depleted by it. And so when you actually either do something for somebody else, do something with somebody who you care about, you go outside and take a 20-minute walk around the block, I guarantee you that that's going to give you a boost and an uplift, and actually will provide some of, it'll fuel motivation. I think sometimes we overthink how motivation has a role when we rely too much on it. One thing that's really important, and research backs this up, is just making the behavior that we want to do easier in some way, and making the one we don't want to harder. I mean, for women,
that's very blue zones.
It's so blue zones that, put that jog bra on before you leave the house, or, you can just put those sneakers by the door. But also, it's just, if you even sometimes just make yourself go with a friend, say at 5 o'clock, I'm going for a walk for 30 minutes with you. We also underestimate the value of just what they call incidental ambulation, not the ones where you've got to just break into a sweat. Like what you talk about, if you just move a lot, you don't have to exercise a day in your life.
I love that. Incidental ambulation. That's like walking to get your mail.
Yeah.
Well, very related to that. I mean, you cite that more effective than taking a Xanax for reducing stress is spending time with your pet. So one thing we can all do to make that de-stressor easy is to adopt a dog. And that's, I mean, if I were the blue zone action would be, rather than remembering to do something nice for somebody else, we'd say just adopt a dog, and it's going to be there. It's going to be easy. If you don't pay attention to it, it's going to make you pay attention, and you're going to feel better.
Yes. And you're also going to have to walk it, which is great, because you're going to be moving more, and you'll make friends with people who also have dogs. And I really
That's
missed
a good
that
point.
during the pandemic. And that's just that you're more approachable too when you have a dog. And there's just something lovely about those, even those connections and interactions with strangers that one has.
I think I need a dog. Well, do you want to, anything else you want to tell us about either everyday vitality or getting more vitality ourselves?
Well, sure. I just really want to bring home the point that this is not something that you need to download or buy or sort of turn your life around to do. This is everyday available sort of actions that we can take that aren't in our heads that actually will give us the biggest boost. And I think to take mental health out of our heads into our bodies, how are we embodying vitality? Blue zones. I mean, DanBuettner does this every single day. You are vitality. So I think we have a lot to learn.
Oh,
from
no, no way. That's very, tell us how we can subscribe to Positive Prescription.
I'm at positiveprescription.com. I'm on Positive Prescription on Instagram and on Twitter. It's SamBMD. I've got a newsletter and a bulletin newsletter. And so there are many ways to find me. And I hope you enjoy the book.
I already have. But I've actually missed your newsletter. I don't know if I fell off the list or what, but how do those, by the way, these Positive Prescription newsletters, they're short, they're well designed, and they always deliver actionable ideas. And how do you actually subscribe to that? It's free, right?
It's free. It's a Positive Prescription. And I really, it's what I'm doing with the book too, is I wanted to take research, sort of distill it and find these actionable strategies that were translatable in everyday life. And that's really what I do with the newsletter. But it's at positiveprescription.com. You can find it there and sign up.
And subscribe there. And please do yourself a favor, do your family a favor, get Everyday Vitality. I got it. I've loved it. I've spent the last 2 days with it. I doubled my knowledge of happiness, I think, and I like to think I knew a lot about happiness to begin with. Samantha, thank you for taking your lunch hour with us. It's a delight to see you. Thank you for all the goodness you put in the world, and we hope to see you at a ball soon.
Well, I'm really happy to see you in your kitchen, but I hope to see you in person. You once cooked for me, and it was one of the best meals I've ever had.
Oh, that's right. Yes. If you Google New York Times and dinner with longevity expert, you can see our dinner with Andrew Solomon and Jeff Gordonier. And yes, God, I forgot all about that. So
it was really good. I mean, what you made that night was amazing. I dream about it. I tried to make it, and it was never as good.
Beans, minestrone with 3 beans. As everybody knows, I'm the king of beans. So thank you for taking the time with us. Congratulations on Everyday Vitality, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan. Bye, everybody.
Bye.